And welcome back to Prop by the Bar. Again, another 10,000 viewers.
10,000. We're in the 10,000 club now.
For the last two episodes, we've had 10,000 viewers. So thank you for tuning in.
I can't believe those numbers. They're phenomenal. Thank you very much.
And again, if you want to see and hear from us in the coming episodes,
press subscribe.
So we've got some great high-profile guests coming up in future episodes. So if you want to hear what's happening, the latest, the greatest, the happenings of Geelong, hit subscribe.
Absolutely.
So, market.
It's been fun. Actually, I think it's been interesting. It's starting to turn, I think, a little bit. It's starting to become more clear what's out there and where we're going.
Turn which way?
I think that we're in, when I say turn, I think it's just with the US inflation rate coming back down, it's starting to look like it's on the way down. Hopefully, what that means is our RBA will be less likely to the talk of putting an inflation rate up or our interest rates up will be sort of off the table now.
Well, they meet tomorrow.
They do,
and timing the time of this filming, but they meet tomorrow. Unlikely.
It won't go up.
It won't go up.
When the US inflation rate's coming down, we can't go up. But we need the inflation rate in the US to go down a bit harder than it is. Before ours are adjusted. You've got to remember that the US and overseas, Canada and other places, they really hit their interest rates higher and a lot harder. So they've got a bit further to come back.
It'll be interesting to see the commentary. 3 of the 4 main banks now are still predicting cuts this year.
Yeah, but I think that's dead. I think most of those would have been put out before last week's US inflation figure. They're down at 3.27% in the US. Down from 4.05.
So the only one,
so they're heading down.
Yeah, the only one that's not on board is ANZ.
Yeah,
who predict early next year.
Well, I think we'll have,
which is different from.
I think we'll have a cut early next year. I don't think it'll happen this year. I think what'll happen now is we'll get that stagnated period, and then we'll start seeing it. But I think what we're seeing in the property market right now is we're starting to see that there is some sales coming in the market that are properties that are sort of being forced onto the market, which is sort of good in a way, because that means that the hurt sort of come through and we'll see them resell and get back into the market. But I think with a bit of consistency with knowing that the rates aren't going to go up, people will start coming back into the market and putting their cash back into the market. So I think we'll start seeing a bit more confidence come back in over the next few months. And I think we've got 3 or 4 more hard months of pretty slow stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we get into spring selling, and I think that the market's going to turn quite sharp, quite hard. And I think if you look at a lot of other things around the state of why we should grow, there's so many good reasons why we should grow in Geelong and in Victoria. But one of the main things I think is you'll find that supply versus demand will have an impact. And at the moment, we don't have enough supply. And so the demand's pent up, and it's pent up because there isn't the cash flow in the market from the banks. I think what's going to happen is that's going to break a little bit. We're going to get some cash flow, and we're going to start seeing that demand, impact pricing. I think we've got huge issues out in the estates, which is impacting supply. Where at the moment in March was the first time ever where there was more blocks handed back from settlement that were actually sold.
Yeah, sold through new subdivisions.
Yeah. So these subdivisions where they've sold those blocks at the peak in 2022 and they've now gone to settle those blocks, instead of settling the people that have put down $1,000, now they've reduced in value. Your average 500 square metre block that was $520,000 at the peak in October 2022 is now only worth $470, and so people, rather than taking that hit of $50,000 on the value, people are happy to hand them back and lose their $1,000 deposit. So and then go back to the market and buy them at market value and save their $50,000. So I think that there is so that's the first time we've seen that in our region for quite some time, and so that's interesting. With what that plays into that supply and demand thing that we need some. It's going to make it more and more demand on the established market.
Yeah.
I think if you look at as well, Melbourne and Geelong, we've got more room for growth. We've got more developments ready to go. So what you'll start seeing now is these developers adjust their pricing to meet this new market and start selling those blocks again. And I think you'll see that.
Well, Geelong still is the number 2 highest growth region in Australia.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And we've still got the room to grow, which is different to Sydney and Queensland and Melbourne.
Bless you, Johnny.
We've got more room to grow than many other regions. And on long weekends, clearance rates were quite high, 67% for Geelong. which is pretty good. And the number of auctions was increased too over the weekend after the long weekend. So I think there's quite a lot of sentiment out there to say that things are starting to come around.
Well, I think residential, like we're certainly seeing an upshift in activity there, and that's continued to tick. I think days on market, a lot of conjecture, because obviously the days on market during COVID were artificial or artificially low. And now that we've actually returned to the same sort of numbers that we were pre-pandemic.
Yep.
All right, so we're sort of a normal market with higher rates than we're sort of used to.
And I was having this discussion with someone just yesterday saying, they got their valuation back and they weren't happy because it was the same number they got in 2019.
Did you do it?
Yeah. And my point to them was, it is, because we've gone back to that number. We're back at a 2019, 2020 number before we had that peak. Yeah. And that's pretty well seen across the board in nearly every marketplace.
So the development stuff's still difficult, and the investors are a little bit hit and miss. So I find that the owner-occupier market's really good.
Yep.
What's it going to take for the development, particularly?
For the developers to get going,
to come back in.
Well, developers, we need to get our construction costs sort of down, and we need to stop seeing builders fall over for people to get some confidence to build.
I've just seen the unions today have just got another 20% pay rise. So
how does that happen? How do we get an increase in union wages when trades are now already the highest paid profession in the country, and we've got them, holding the country at ransom now in Victoria? Absolutely. You can see what John Setker's done with the AFL. He's holding people to ransom. And the whole state's being held to ransom now. Yeah, and it's through all these construction projects that are outpricing all the private sector projects, making it almost impossible to stack anything up. I don't think anybody in our industry has seen any internal rate of return above, at an acceptable level for quite some time, because the construction prices are so high. Yeah. Yet the government puts the wages, average wages, up. But what that does mean across the board is the housing affordability for the first time in quite some time is now improved, far improved than it was, because of wage growth.
Yeah, and obviously the cost of construction. A little bit of information to come out finally. The council gives the nod to the high-end development or higher levels in development in Pako.
In Pako, that was good. That was good, wasn't it? And that plays on the back of the other precinct at Pako Street down near Gordon Avenue that was approved back in, I think, 2021. So that design right through there, I think we go from
the western side,
Wellington Street.
So about 6 up to 10.
Waratah Street, right at Church Street, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. And that's all got up to 10 stories, and that's going to be really good. And I think that's really good. It's going to look like Chapel Street at some point. You know how Chapel Street's got those apartments above the retail to look a bit like that, which I think is cool.
You'll be able to cut laps in Pako instead of Chapel Street now.
Well, the interesting thing is there's better parking in Pako Street. So you've got to wonder if the lack of a transport plan and lack of parking in the CBD is going to mean that Pakenham Street almost becomes Geelong's new CBD, because it's going to be easier to develop high-rise there. It's going to be easier to get a unit there. It's going to be easier to park there, and it's going to be easier to live there.
Do you think it'll be easier to sell apartments?
I think it'll be easier to sell apartments in Pakenham Street than it will be. Yeah, I reckon it will be. In Pakenham Street as opposed to, say, Ryrie Street. Yeah, I reckon I'd rather live on Pako at the moment. In an apartment. Yeah, you probably get some bay views on the one side of Pakenham Street, wouldn't you, over the top?
Oh, you definitely do.
Yeah. So you get some bay views, and you get all the shops and the boutique and the cafes.
You're still close to all amenity, walkability score to train station.
Yep. So I think Pakenham Street's an absolute ripper. It's going to change the way Pakenham Street looks, and I know people don't like the look of that, but let's be honest, it could do with a faceclift. So
but it just brings more amenity, more things to do. So.
There's a fair bit in the pipework for planning. There's coming up this year. There's the South Geelong Urban Design Frameworks coming up. That's further around South Geelong and around Moorabool Street, the Geelong South train station and all that area. And then you've got the Marshall Precinct Structure Plan coming in, and you've got the Jetty Road Design Urban Stage, which is around a new, more future residential stuff around Jetty Road. And then you've got the Balmoral Quay Rippleside Amendment, which will allow an increase in maximum building heights along Balmoral as well, up to about 27 metres, which is about 6 stories in Balmoral. So there's quite a few planning stuff happening. That will change the way Balmoral looks too, which is, probably plays in with Pakenham Street, becomes that density, so the inner areas of Geelong become more and more dense. Yeah. Which is what has to happen, I suppose. Yeah.
So bring it back to market today. We talk about property cycles.
Yep.
Where are we? Where are we in the property clock?
Oh, look, so you've had that we've had that first dip, right? And I think we've had that correction as we've talked about, and we've corrected up a little bit. And then and we've recovered. We've had that recovery stage when everybody put their house in the market when they first saw a little bit of light in the tunnel. And I think now we're in that stagnation stage where we're just sort of we'll see some small growth, and we'll just see a bit of a flatlining, slow growth between here and Christmas in the property stage before we see another jump. I think in that first interest rate drop will probably be signal the first sort of decent increase in that back end of that cycle. So we're sort of midpoint in the cycle, and if I was in this cycle, this is not the time to be selling really. I know agents don't like to hear that, but this is the buying time. This is absolutely the buying time.
Yeah, I agree, but it's all relative to why you're selling. If you're buying and selling in the same market...
Oh yeah, that's all relative, that's fine.
And opportunities lay in the market.
Yep, now. And property is long-term, right? It's a long-term game. So if you're trying to make money in property, it's over a long period of, these 7 to 10 year cycles. Geelong's had 4-year cycles for quite some time. So, you've got to hold. But I think we're probably 2 years into probably a 5 or 6 year cycle.
Yeah.
And might even be a bit more elongated than that. Normally they're 4. I think this one will be elongated. So maybe we'll be 5 or 6 before we see the peak again. But I think, it's progressing as you would expect a cycle to do. And that's a bit hard on some people, but there will be good times ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
So you have mentioned good times to come in terms of the property side of things, but in the short term, we're seeing a little bit of pain in relation to, I guess...
Well, we're being taxed, aren't we?
Land tax.
We're being taxed. The pain's coming from the government. We're getting taxed out of us. I don't know how many taxes we've got now. We've got stamp duty, land tax, commercial industrial tax. I can't even keep up.
Well, we've had 53... increased or new taxes implemented under the Andrews government.
And these taxes are having a direct impact on investors. There's like 20% of investors now have left the property market in Geelong region to sold up properties and put them back to market, which has only put increased pressure on renters, and the rental pressure has increased. But there's been some recent changes in that stuff when you're talking to some of the experts, and we're lucky enough to have some experts in both tax.
Well, that's a great segue, mate, for our guests. We've got not one but 2 guests this episode. So our first guest is Lydia Eastwood from RLW Lawyers. She's going to talk to us about the changes to stamp duty and land tax.
Yep.
And then we've got Donna Cross, who's the principal of McGrath in Geelong, to talk to us about some of the changes in compliance and property management.
Yeah, and they're both very clever girls. Are going to tell us heaps because they are right at the coalface of both these topics.
So both those interviews coming in now. With a raft of new property taxes and legislation changes, we thought, what better guest to bring in than Lydia Eastwood, who is a senior associate at RLW Lawyers. And Lydia, thanks for joining us on Propped.
Thank you for having me.
We keep hearing about all these changes to land tax and a whole bunch of other taxes.
Yeah,
it's dominated the last few episodes.
Yeah.
So we thought...
Mike, dominated. It's Disneyland out there. It's like it's a Tim Palace Disneyland, right? There's that many taxes now that they actually don't understand the economics of it at all, I reckon.
I think the Andrews / Allen government has introduced or increased 52 new taxes in there.
52. 52. Yeah, and you see them, they got stuck into it, Parliament about it too. 52 new taxes. And, if you were any other market, when you got a problem with demand and supply, you can react to the market, right? You can put on more supply, and eventually, naturally, that marketplace would adjust and the prices would come down and everything would get back to normal. We're at a marketplace which is just stagnated by bureaucracy and legal rigor and taxes now, so we can't add demand. So it can't naturally come back to the place it needs to come back to. It can't naturally correct. This market is no longer able to naturally correct because of all these taxes, and I'm on the phone to Lydia nearly every single day asking her to explain another tax.
Sorry about that.
No, it's a minefield for property lawyers at the moment, and where there's not much warning, not much consultation, and we're just trying to keep up with it all. And clients
you keep up with it really well. That's why we
hope so.
Because you're right on point all the time. So let's just run through some of the taxes that we've come up with recently. So let's start with the stamp duty, right? Run us through the change of the stamp duty.
Yep. So from 1 July this year, they've introduced the commercial industrial property tax, which is a new way to transact. It's actually like a transactional tax for commercial and industrial properties which have a certain valuation AV classification, as you know.
Yep.
So depending if it's in those areas, they've introduced a tax of 1% on the value of the land.
Now, very importantly, that starts as the 1st of July when you sign a contract.
Correct.
So if you're about to buy a commercial industrial property and you sign a contract before the 1st of July, you don't get the 1% charge per annum.
You're exempt.
You're exempt.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So there's a reason to get out there and buy your property fairly quickly, because 1st of July, 1% per annum added to the value you pay every year.
Yep.
Can it be considered an outgoing?
No, well, for retail leases, you can't pass it down as an outgoing, but commercial leases, you can.
So non-act leases.
Correct,
Yeah.
non-act leases like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the difference is that it's a transactional tax. So, basically, any transactions after 1 July 2024 that relate to commercial or industrial property.
It's a transactional tax when it's going to be around forever.
Yeah, I know,
Like
but it's triggered by that
the idea of
transaction.
stamp duty is that it's a once-off tax when you transact.
Yeah.
This thing's going to be around as one annual tax forever.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Obviously, the government now, they know they can predict what the amount's going to be with a 1% tax, whereas stamp duty, it's just they can't gauge and foresee that
Foresee the future.
then budget based on what's going to be coming in. Exactly. So it's obviously going to be some clients are saying, should I opt in, opt out of this? But from what I can see, it's all about the maths, but I can't see the advantage of being part of it. They wouldn't do it otherwise.
That's just the start, wasn't it? Right?
Yes.
That's just the first.
So that's not the only change with the stamp duty.
Yeah, so
you can pay it all up.
All up front. So when that transaction happens in relation to a commercial or industrial property after 1 July 2024, you'll be the last person that first transaction to pay stamp duty, and you can either pay that up front or over a 10-year interest, like the government's giving a loan for that. There's interest payable, and it becomes a first registered charge on the property, so it's above any mortgage or anything like that. And then on the 11th year after that transaction has taken place, that CIPT tax comes in, which is 1% per annum for the lifetime of the property, really.
And if you've chosen to defer it and the property is sold, say, in year 5, how do they treat it?
So defer it by what? Sorry, the
land tax.
The stamp duty. At year 5 you have to then pay that balance of the stamp duty on that transaction.
You pay it off your transaction.
Yeah,
like a first mortgage. Before you get your money, they'll take their money.
And it should come up all on as it obviously will be a charge on the title. And then the land tax certificate will show that CIPT charge once.
Which is going to affect everything, like lending and everything, because now if banks, we're going to have to look at the titles and see there's a charge on the title, they'll take off their lending ability. So they whack you in one place and it hits you in 3 others.
Yeah.
And now we've got land tax as well. So we've dropped the threshold of land tax.
Yep, dropped the threshold.
We went from 350,000 down to 50,000, and what that means is a lot of people are going to get whacked, aren't they?
Yep. And we've got that COVID-19...
Oh, yeah, the extra thrash on top, so...
Temporary 10-year tax on there, which a lot of people are ringing up and really concerned because it's on each of their properties for that. And then the biggest change too is that Victorian residential land tax. So that's vacant residential land tax. So.
But that was always been around, but what it's done is extended it from the metropolitan area to the rest of Victoria.
Yeah.
And it's on vacant land. But it's self-reporting.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So
it's self-reporting, and it's on not vacant land necessarily, residential properties that are vacant. So it's all to get around the government's concern that a lot of properties weren't being lived in, and they had the housing crisis and the rental crisis and all of that. So they're wanting people to rent out their properties. And if you don't do so, I know, for at least 6 months.
These things because the market goes, they're getting no return for those properties, and then eventually they'll sell them.
Yeah.
Right? So they don't have to get involved.
Yeah.
The government's just getting involved, creating more and more hurdles for property owners.
Yeah.
Right? It's just ridiculous.
And again, this tax is on the improved, or not like land tax where it's the unimproved value. It's got that sort of floor. This is on the
improved value.
On improved value.
Which is a greater number.
And it goes up each year. So
you're sitting
2,
on
then 3.
20 apartments in a block, and maybe you were getting the tenants out so you could redevelop that into a bigger development.
Yeah.
You'll now get taxed on the whole property.
Yeah.
So you can't do your development. That's great. Just take more supply out of the system, Mike. And the other thing that's taking supply out of the system, what about windfall tax?
Yeah.
What about our mate windfall? Like, seriously.
So that's been in for a while, as we all know, and we're actually starting to see it come into play and see transactions, see it being struck and clients sort of dealing with it now. But yeah, the big thing is that we can't, from 1 January this year, pass on windfall gain tax, existing windfall gain tax liabilities to purchasers, and land tax, obviously, too, which has been a major change for the market, just taking into consideration.
Nearly all these taxes, these are all state-based taxes, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So this is the state, this is the Andrews government, and what's his name? Jacinta Allen's government, and Mr. Pallas's cook shop. So it's just tax after tax, 52 new taxes. And are you finding that a lot of people are owners and that are coming to you like in a lot of trouble?
Yeah, I'm just seeing that it's really affecting those people that, my generation that are just trying to get into the market and have one investment property. And when you've got all the holding costs, insurance and all that, and then tax on top and then the interest rates, it's just not even, you're making a massive loss.
It's a bit rich because when we went through COVID, it was Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, this is your problem. You must give your your tenant the discount equivalent of their, their drop in revenue. We get out of there and now they're like, well, no, we need money.
So we're going to tax you again.
Because we spent too much money. So it's your problem again. So it just seems to be a real attack on property owners.
Yeah. And there'll be more to come. I mean, there's even that one on short stay accommodation coming.
Oh, the proposed short stay accommodation tax,
Yeah.
And it just keeps adding on, don't they? Just one on top of the other.
Anecdotally, what have you seen clients' land tax bills increase by?
Oh, double some of them. And they're all, especially ones properties that are in trust. That's a real issue at the moment. And having a property in a family trust, for example, is not as tax effective as it used to be. There's issues with Division 7A loans. I won't get into the boring stuff, but you can't do as much as you can do with them. So we're getting lots of transactions trying to get them out of trust without duty to beneficiaries of trusts, and
what that means is
very complicated process.
It's harder. The lending becomes harder. Money doesn't flow. The economy and the market can't balance itself out because there's all these rigmaroles and it's okay to let's bring in a windfall tax because we're worried about a minority of 1% who are on selling property and to tax them out. And instead of just doing that, we're now affecting the whole market and we're creating a supply issue. Let's just bugger the supply issue one more time. Let's go on broadening stamp duty and let's decrease the threshold for land tax. It's just hit on our ability to provide supply to the market. You're not going to get out of this fluctuations within this market. And it can't normalise like this. It's ridiculous.
Lydia? What else are we seeing in terms of changes in property? There's a few legislation changes, especially around hazardous materials and reporting of.
Yeah, so they've actually, just because we're in such a different market, we've got a big issue with buyers being very diligent, which they should be. We're in a bit more of a buyer's market we're seeing. So they've all brought in that material fact disclosures for agents. You've got to disclose, any hazardous materials, building reports with properties that have brought up defects or anything like that. And now we're extensively negotiating contracts and if there's a major defect and all of that, which is really affecting, I don't know what you're sort of seeing, Michael, but negotiating prices after contracts are into, we're varying contracts and reducing prices by issues, coming up with the property. Nearly every building reports coming up with a major defect or something wrong with the property. So
we've got a few ones.
And the question is, what do you deem as a
major because that's the problem. People are arguing even that point. Most provisions say if it's a designated major defect, the purchaser can terminate the contract. They actually don't even have the right to negotiate, but that naturally happens. But then we're having arguments about what's a major defect. I mean, this didn't all used to happen. People would just buy a property and you wouldn't dare do a building inspection because you want to miss out on it. It's hard enough to get one. So then, with all this material fact disclosure for agents, they're now sort of questioning and saying how much do we have to, as they should disclose this to new purchasers. And, they're going in with really playing with your cards face down.
They've got to tell them everything. So if someone died in there, they've got to tell them that. They've got to tell them if there was a defect or anything.
Asbestos. Or if there's been a fire.
For people in full knowledge. I think we talk about as value as full knowledgeable purchaser from market value. So, I mean, but it's just the fact that how is the agent supposed to know everything about the property? Like, it's almost impossible.
And where does it
end?
Where does their liability lay? In terms of they can say they don't know if were they told, were they not, was it disclosed?
Exactly. But do checklists and then it's like how can you really reasonably represent your seller? When you at what point you're supposed to say it, like you're supposed to disclose it as soon as a purchaser's interested. That's really even the point of when they say, all right, look, can I see a contract and vendor statement or show them around? You're supposed to say, look, these are some material facts you need to be aware of. This has all been put on the agent,
and there's some sort of new strike team that they're going to go around.
Consumer
affairs are going to go around and beat up the agents for doing it and stuff. What about the residential tenancy stuff? There's a lot going on with that too. There's changes to all that.
Everything's just consumer protection, as we know. So now here again, we're that was protecting the purchaser. Now we're protecting the tenants.
No one's protecting the landlord. By
the vendors. So now it's a lot of giving them notice when you're selling. Only certain limited abilities to terminate the lease, especially if it's on a periodic lease. When you sell a property, I think you've got to, give compensation for inspections. And
you've got to give notice, 3 days notice before you can sell it. True and all sorts of stuff.
I think the government's just feeling very consumer protection and friendly at the moment. So we just got to change all the way we...
I think they're at Disneyland. Absolute Disneyland. Have a check. We're at Disneyland at the moment. The green screen's working.
Well, they're very, very close to, killing the goose to lay the golden egg. I think 2/3 of all state revenue comes from stamp duty and land tax. And I reckon they're about to break it.
And it's a good segue, Mike, because our next guest is going to tell us a bit about what's happening in the rental market from an agent's point of view. And so why don't we get into that? Thank you very much, Lydia.
Thank you.
Appreciate your insight.
Thanks for joining us, Lydia.
No, my pleasure.
RLW Law.
RLW, yep.
Anything property law, they're the people to go to. I certainly use them myself. So.
Thank you so much.
I'll give you a bit of rub.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay, and to talk about a whole range of changes and rental legislation changes to our industry, we've brought in the big gun, the principal of property management at McGrath Estate Agents in Geelong, Donna Cross. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's good to have you.
Good to have you. Oh, good to be here.
And I'm liking this idea today, having you both here, because with Mike and yourself, we've got two of Geelong's leading agency perspectives able to talk about some of these huge issues that I don't think we're getting enough attention to in the marketplace. And I think that it's all around the rentals, and that's really where it's at the moment. Is what are the investors getting for their money anymore? Because they're not, and they're leaving the market in droves. We've got we did some the maths recently that I had a look at. If your average family income in Geelong is around that 91 to 94,000 per annum, and you're using the affordability calculator that you guys use to put people in, then the average household can only afford to pay about $510 a week. But if I have a look at the average rental in the market, they're well above that because they have to pay land taxes and get these returns. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing a lot of investors come out of the market? What are you seeing, Nora?
Well, we are, but the costs aren't correlating with the rent at the moment. So we've got owners who are expecting to get higher rent when they actually come back out to market.
Yep.
And it's just not happening at the moment.
So you're not getting rental growth?
No.
So are we seeing rental come back down in the numbers, or is it stagnated?
So from your properties that are 600 and above, that's stagnated.
Yep.
Although the properties at, the lower end properties, so your 300 to 500, we have got a slight rise in those, and that's just supply and demand, basically.
And you've got a pretty broad book right across Geelong, don't you? So you've got a pretty good perspective on where it's going. Is there certain areas in Geelong that are performing better from a rental perspective than others?
Well, we've got properties that we put on the market for 1,600 and 1,800 and 1,200. They go like that. They go after the first open.
That's 1,200 a week.
Correct.
So they're the high end.
The real high end properties. There's a pool of people who want those properties. they're potentially moving to the area from interstate, trying to find out where they actually want to live, and they're used to a certain
so they'll pay for the big bucks.
They will. And I'll have 5 people fighting for those sort of properties.
Yeah, right.
And we'll rent them after the first open for inspection or sometimes prior. Our 600 to 800 are struggling a little bit. We used to, sit for 14 days to 21 days.
Yep.
They're leading out to,
there seems to be a lot in that marketplace for rent, isn't there?
There are, and owners are, during COVID, obviously we had the moratorium, so we couldn't increase rents. So after that, rents were increased by $60, $100, $120 sometimes, which was fair and reasonable because they hadn't been increased for potentially 2 to 3 years. So it's sort of like stabilised the market, but now what we're seeing, we're coming back out. People may have been in those properties for about 3 years. And it's pulling back. And unfortunately, the rental providers aren't used to, they're thinking they should be achieving an extra 20, an extra 50 potentially because of all of the extra costs. And unfortunately, it's actually coming back. So getting them on the market and getting them to adjust price has been quite difficult.
So it's a pretty simple story, isn't it, Mike, when you think about it? Like, you've got rents coming back and you've got all these extra costs we just talked about with Lydia to the investor.
We've got minimum standards.
Yep.
All right, so properties have to comply to a minimum standard now. So there's a lot of costs that's gone into that. We've had 13 interest rate rises. We've now got increased land tax bills.
Yep. And stamp duty and windfall and vacant residential land and one CIPT and who knows, probably just a Tim Palace tax to sake, being Tim Palace probably.
It's a big bag to unravel.
Yeah. So it's
So let me guess.
So the return
all impacting supply. What do you know?
Well, it is, because it's driving investors.
Of course it is. Yeah. And so investors are leaving the market, that's what you're saying?
Yes, we are. Not me. They are.
Across the market?
Like, with regard to the minimum standards, there's some costs there that were unexpected and people weren't budgeting for. So, for instance, if they had their gas and electrical servicing done and they had to get a switchboard or they had to get a new ducted heating service, like some things cost up to $10,000 to $20,000. So at the moment we're offering, offering people to go and see people to get investment loans so that they can actually pay for these things. However, people are just putting their properties on the market. And like you were saying earlier, they're just asking for how much their property's worth. And it is a buyer's market at the moment, which is also quite challenging for them.
Well, if the average rent is, what did you say it was,
510 was what they needed to get to. If the statistics are right around the average family income of about 91 to 94,000 in Geelong, then that's 30% affordable. That's right, isn't it?
It's 30% affordability.
30% is your affordability.
If you've got a mortgage on that,
they can only afford
and the movement of money, and all the other things that we've spoken about, what is actually the net return on a lot of these properties versus having cash at the bank?
Well, you'd have a mortgage of like 70% anyway, mate. 65 to 70% would be probably the average, I'd reckon. So you're paying a mortgage on a property, say if it was going to get returning 510 a week, you're probably worth around $1 million, about that.
Yep.
So you've probably got a mortgage then of about 700 grand. So therefore you're paying about $4,500 a month in interest at the moment. And then you take off.
It's less not bad, is it?
Then you take off. Yeah, then you take off your...
Someone fact-checked that.
Then you take off... So you're going to need to get... like your 510 a week is getting you what? Like $2,000 a month on average. So you're not covering your costs.
No.
Oh, long shot.
No.
Yeah, you're not
covering your interest. So you're in a bit of shite at the moment as investors, residential investors. I mean, I think a lot of those properties, they would have been held there a long time, hopefully. Like they're maybe they don't have the big mortgages on them and things like that. A lot of the stock, I think, in the marketplace would have been long-term stock, do you think?
Some, but because of the low interest rates for such a long time, there's a lot of people who have, the mums and dads who have gone, right, I can get an investment going, or, the multiple landlords who, like you were talking about earlier with the developers, they've got 2 or 3 developments on the go and didn't anticipate, the land taxes and all of these other costs involved.
There's some people talk about, bad negative gear. If you're negative gear, you must be a loaded billionaire, and that's just rubbish now because you've got this huge rise in costs. You must see a whole lot more properties that are now negative geared.
Correct.
That means that they're costing more than they actually return.
Correct.
Right? So that for most of us, I can't afford a negative geared property. Like, as soon as I have negative property, that's coming out of what I can, put food I can put on the table for my kids. So for the reality is negative geared property isn't something you want.
No.
Right? And we've got some huge rises in that. So I think we're in it, it's in a good...
And it's been floated a few times. I think it lost Bill Short in the election.
Yeah.
And there's some sniffs of it at the moment. Imagine if they got rid of negative gearing in terms of taxation.
And if they they got rid of negative gearing, where would you be? We'd be buggered again. Like, more supply out of the market, And again, I go back to the fact this is the only marketplace now with all this stuff going on that we can't normalise. It just cannot normalise it. They've broken it.
Yeah, Consumer Affairs now also putting together a posse to catch out.
Yeah. You guys sweating about that? Sweating? So I have to come down and help out one day?
I know that there's $4 million they could spend somewhere else.
$4 million have a bunch of money come into your office and tell you how to do your job.
There is pretty substantial penalties for landlords and agents that don't comply with.
Correct. And like
They'll
you were
lock you
saying,
up.
when you're talking about liability earlier, our agency had a gentleman from Consumer Affairs take our team out to properties to show us what it meets minimum standards and what doesn't. Some of the minimum standards, I don't know, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. So he came out and let us know, but he also let us know that when the task force does start, and they will be hitting fines.
So you're the agent, but you're also supposed to be responsible for the minimum standards of the property.
Correct. So the disclosure statements, similar to the sales, is prior to putting a landlord or onboarding a landlord, you need to get them to fill out the disclosure statement. That's their side of it. But when we're going and doing that first routine inspection or prior to advertising the property, we're to check that all of that information is correct. So we're actually bound together in terms of the obligation, is how I see it. And yes, there's a lot to do. We've got 1,400 properties, so there is a hell of a lot of work to do. With owners, you've got owners who can't afford it at the moment. They put in 130 reforms. You've got 30% of property managers leaving the market. You've got increasing wages for property managers. They deserve it, by the way. However, for agencies, the extra work plus the extra costs of wages it's astounding.
Yeah, it's just becoming a bit hard, isn't it? Hard to do business. But in terms of the rentals across, where do you see things going? You think are we sort of oversupplied at the moment, undersupplied? Do you see rentals going up or down? Where do you see?
I think it's
where do you see the rest of the year?
I still think it is really positive. So there's some real positive things. There's some challenges, yes. But there's still a lot of renters out there that need properties. There's still people moving all of the time. We have 70 properties for rent at, each month. We're renting at least generally about 40, 45 of those out. Last month was quite slow. So there's still a lot of movement. There's still a lot of people moving to Geelong. Still plenty of inquiry. So, it's not the end of the world. However, we are in a little bit of a dip at the moment, but we will come out the other side. I mean, I've been in property management for 15 to 16 years and I've just seen dips and troughs.
What dictates that as for rentals?
What dictates
that? Like we see sales, like it's elections and it's interest rates, and what are the motivating factors of the dips in property management?
Well, that's actually a really good question. I'd say that the dips the increase that we had throughout COVID was people were moving in troves from Melbourne, from other states, because we're close to the beaches, and so rents went up because it was supply and demand then. At the moment, we've had people move back to Melbourne. So I've got people who purchased here, renting their properties out and moving back to Melbourne now because they've got to get back into the offices where they are.
They don't want to live.
They were fantastic. We love them. We love Melbourne people. So I think it's just not as many people moving to Geelong. However, they are saying by 2025 that the population will increase substantially. So that's why I see. Why I see things.
It's interesting
forward.
That move back to Melbourne thing, because I was looking at some of the statistics of growth, and those suburbs that grew the most through that COVID period were like East Geelong and South Geelong, and that they've also suffered the biggest decline this time around. So they've taken their teal bicycles and they've headed back up the highway. And good luck to them.
Well, East Geelong was...
Using those bike lanes, right?
Yeah. Someone's got to use them.
Yeah, well, God, don't even start me on the bike lanes. East Geelong is actually number one they are saying for rentability, affordability.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So because it's dropped quite a lot in the price point.
Yes.
The price is down about 16%.
Yeah.
So over the 2 years since the peak in 2022, about quarter one 2022 it peaked.
Yeah.
In East Geelong, and it had it like a growth of like 47%. Do you remember that? It just went through the roof.
Yeah.
Because they all thought it was Fitzroy, and then they figured out it's not, and they've gone home.
Oh, some of the prices were very exciting, what people got. But unfortunately, what you probably recognise is people who bought throughout COVID and needing to sell now. Yeah.
Bought at the height of the market. So thanks for joining us on Prop and giving us some insight to what's happening in all things property management. And if you're looking for Donna, you'll find her at McGrath. But otherwise, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Thanks.
Pretty lucky to have two great guests on today.
Both very amazing. Yep.
But they delivered bad news with quite eloquence. I think
They did.
There's a lot of tax to be paid,
Tax.
and a lot of COVID tax, and
It's just a word, isn't it? Tax.
Yeah.
Okay. Thing.
but anyway, something we'll get used to. Oh, we are used to it. But anyway, another thing that we've been harping on here is the COVID money.
Yes. Well, the lack of our Commonwealth Games funding grants that.
Have they found a home for the Com Games yet?
No, I don't think they did. Yeah, no, it might be dead in the water forever. Might have succumbed to the Andrew curse, I should say.
But we've got some of it, a little bit of it.
We did. We got Stead Park, which is going to be good, the hockey pitches, and we got Warm Ponds, which is the indoor basketball courts and netball courts, which are so badly needed.
Oh, huge.
I was at the Geelong United game of the weekend. We beat Melbourne Tigers, and it was a fantastic game. And packed house again, and I've been to nearly every game this year. And packed house every game. If that's not a reason to build a proper stadium for our basketball club, I don't know what is. If they would sell it out 3 or 4 times over every time.
Well, it just gives an opportunity to vie for an NBL licence as well, which I think would be incredibly fantastic for
and you
Geelong
see
economy.
the WNBL, they've got the women have got a licence now, which is fantastic. So congratulations, Geelong United. Fantastic.
Good. And on other sporting, well, not a sporting, or this could be a sporting.
It's a sporting thing, yeah. We welcome Grant McCabe as the president of the Geelong Football Club. Welcome. I know he's been on the board, but it's good that he's become president. And unfortunately, though, we saw that Diana Taylor stepped down, our previous guest.
Yep.
And I'd like to just shout out to Diana because she's a good friend, but also supporter. And I'm a supporter of hers because she does a lot around the community. She basically willed Anam Kari into life, which is an amazing thing. She's also been involved with, I think she was one of the reasons why they ended up with a female football team at Geelong. She's been a huge advocate for female sport in the region, as well as Anam Kara and so many other things. So, Diana, we love you. Keep going. And but congratulations on whatever the next journey happens to be and stepping down from Geelong Football Club after such great achievements.
Well done.
Well done.
And well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up. So again, thanks for Donna and Lydia for joining us on Propped and delivering bad news with such eloquence, as I said. Again, thanks to all our viewers, another 10,000 viewers last episode. So we've been blown away by everybody's kind words. And don't forget to subscribe. Great guests coming up in the coming months, and we'll see you around on the next episode of Prop by the Bar.
Have a good one.